You really get a feel for the impact of what's happened in just the last hour. This could turn into an all-night street party in Cairo as Egyptians celebrate the news that President Hosni Mubarak has stepped down from office. After weeks of violent protests, Mubarak is now handing over control of Egypt to the military. This is certainly big news, but the situation in Egypt is far from stable. TJ Winnick has more on what will happen in the coming days.
On the 18th day of upheaval, the pro-democracy demonstrators got what they were fighting for.
President Hosni Mubarak has decided to step down as president of Egypt.
The crowds in the Liberation Square went wild, chanting, "Egypt is free, Egypt is free." Earlier today, demonstrators spread from the square to state TV and to the presidential palace. But President Mubarak is not there. A senior government official tells ABC News that he and his wife have left the capital. It's believed they are in the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh.
Where is that Mubarak? Agree or not? Who is that Omar Suleiman? Agree or not? Where is that the army? Agree or not? This will have.
Protesters were motivated today by anger and bitterness after Mubarak refused to step down last night.
Our objective is not changing the president. It's not removing Hosni Mubarak and replacing him with Omar Suleiman. Our objective is changing the whole rotten regime.
The regime doesn't intimidate us. We intimidate the regime.
Outside state television, demonstrators were peaceful, celebratory, and determined. TJ Winnick, ABC News, New York.
Who I spoke to just a short time ago was basically giddy on the phone. Her father called her with the news, and she immediately called some of her closest friends who live in Egypt. She said they are celebrating and screaming into the phones how excited they are. They feel they made a difference and that Egypt has a much better future ahead. Denise, Tanya, thank you very much. What's your reaction to the news that Mubarak has stepped down?
Well, it's not a surprise. I was telling someone yesterday, if I was a betting man, I would bet within 24 hours he would step down, because something that was not reported yesterday, that the Ministry of Interior met under the lead of Mr. Tantawi, that's to hand over basically the military to the rights of the military, which Mubarak was the commander-in-chief, and he was no longer a commander-in-chief of the army. That happened yesterday, but unfortunately it was not reported. I didn't see that on our news. However, what you're going to see is an extreme strategic points now, of course, for the security of Israel, for the Arab countries, and this is a vital time for the U.S. to, of course, look at this and see how we can be of support, more not overwhelming, but support to the Egyptian people.
What?
Well, I think this was already planned before, and I think they wanted to just throw a wrench in this whole and confuse the whole world again, as they've done before. And honestly, what we see now is that they should have done this 18 days ago or 15 days ago, and they could have saved a lot of lives. But Mubarak is a dictator in a sense, and now he, of course, appointed Omar Suleiman, who is the vice president, and I don't think he will survive the longevity of the Egyptian government either.
Because he has been so close to Mubarak and his hand-picked successor, if you will.
Very much so. I met him on the flight between Orlando and D.C. About 7 months ago, and had a good chat with him, and didn't know that he would ever be the vice president of Egypt. But he's looked at as, again, with all due respect, as Mubarak Jr. So that's how he's viewed by the Egyptian population.
Now, the army is taking over. Is that a good thing? Does that suggest military rule?
I think this is the best from all things that are on the table. I think that's the best thing they could ask for. The army is very well respected in Egypt. I remember as a child, grew up in the Middle East, that the Egyptian army was very strong and powerful, and I think they showed their true colors in the past 18 days towards the protection of their people. And they couldn't ask for better, because we have to be cognizant of the fact that you have a faction group, you have the Muslim Brotherhood that are, of course, creeping in. That's a huge concern, of course, for the U.S. and for Israel and for the Arab countries. So we've got, I think, the best deal for Egypt. Now, what stands to be seen is where and how they dictate their movements from here on in until the election time.
So what about the wider Middle East? What do you think this means for Jordan, Lebanon, and other Middle Eastern countries?
Well, I think it's going to bring a lot of awareness, especially to the smaller countries. I think Jordan, on a whole, have had a lot of dealings with Jordan. I think the king of Jordan is a very strong, very smart, and I think he'll do what's right for his country. But again, you never know. You have 80% of Palestinians in Jordan. But on the other hand, with the other countries, Syria and Lebanon, that, of course, is a volatile situation. And what you got are young people who are rising up and saying, we want to live. We want to have freedom as democracy, and we need the democracy, and democracy is contagious.
You know, what do you make of the Muslim Brotherhood and the fear of their influence? Because everything that you kind of see and hear from the protesters there does not really seem to suggest that they're going to have the Muslim Brotherhood that much influence, because they keep talking about democracy and freedom, and we've even seen placards that some of the protesters have been holding saying, let freedom ring. I remember seeing one that said, we shall overcome. So what do you make of their potential influence?
Well, I may not be popular when I say what I will say, is that the Muslim Brotherhood have been insignificant for a very long time. Of course, that could change. I think the people of Egypt on a whole are not interested in the dictatorship rule or in Islamic faction rule. They're interested in democracy. And the Muslim Brotherhood, of course, they're a serious concern. They're the people who assassinated Anwar Sadat. They're concerned to Egypt. And I honestly don't think if we don't give them a lot of, we paint a great picture of them, I don't think there'll be an issue. That's my personal opinion, of course.
Iran, we understand, Iran's president says that this is the end of U.S. influence in the Middle East, talking about Mubarak stepping down. Does this strengthen Iran's influence in the region?
You know, there's a word I've always used in Arabic, is say kalam fadi, which is empty words, and I think the Iranian leader has always given us empty words. I don't think they're concerned. Of course, they're concerned about his influence in nuclear, but I don't think his statement really is going to influence the Arab mentality on a whole.
And what do you think about how this entire revolution has happened? You know, the peaceful protests and thinking back, you know, remembering a week or so ago when the violence broke out and the pro-government demonstrators were attacking the anti-government protesters. What does this say about this movement?
Well, if you look in the crowd and you look real close, you don't see any anti-West or anti-Semitism signs or burning of flags or pictures of the U.S. leaders. All you see are crosses and Qurans are being carried, and these people, all they wanted is change. And I think they deserve the change, and they deserve the freedom to vote. But above all, I think, have been to Egypt over 20 times and seen the poverty and the corruption. And truthfully, the corruption is from the leadership right to the clerk at the DMV. Everything is by cash-driven society. I think they're tired, and they're tired of living on $2 or $3 a day to feed their families. And that's the biggest issue I think we're faced with.
You know, there was a tweet, I don't know if it was this morning or yesterday, I can't be sure of that, but it did come from the protest leader, that Google executive, Mr. Gonum. He tweeted this. He said, "Dear Western government, you've been silent for 30 years supporting the regime that was oppressing us. Please don't get involved now." What do you make of that?
Well, and the reason I laugh is because it makes me think of the rich uncle up on the hill, and that's what we are looked at in the Middle East, unfortunately. And I think the U.S. could really do justice to the Arab world by support and being proactive versus we've been a reactive government on all our fronts. And that's one thing we need to change is our approach. And if we can subsidize, not financially, but help them with their votes, with getting the corruption and getting democracy on the way, I think we're going to be seen as the kind brother versus the mean brother.
And, you know, with that in mind, in a little while, President Obama is supposed to go on the air and speak live about this. What do you think the administration needs to say at this moment?
I think the administration, with all the tools they've had, I think they've done a reasonable job. I think our president has tried. But again, the Arab world is a very difficult world to understand. And the one thing our government can do is, again, as I said, is to provide and help with the elections, to give them a free and free votes as we do here, and assist them in that area so they can develop the democracy they're looking for.
And explain why it is that Egypt is so important. Why it is that Americans need to understand the importance of what's happening on this day with Mubarak stepping down, and what this means for the future of Egypt and the Middle East to us.
Well, if you go back to the days of Gamal Abdel Nasser, Egypt became a great ally of the U.S. And then Anwar Sadat, of course, with the peace treaty with Israel, which is significant. It has 80 million population. It's one of the largest, strongest army in the region, and it does represent the Arab world. You know, they used to say Egypt is the mother of the Arab world, and it still is. So what now they're trying to do is try to establish their security, and I think what's so important now for us as we move our next step forward is to have the government, the Egyptian government, cooperate with us at all costs. I mean that for the security, for the diplomacy, and also for the peace treaty that's been in place for 30 years between Israel and the U.S.
You know, it's just such a stunning development, especially when you take into account that Tunisia just recently ousted its leader, and now we see that the people have gotten rid of Mubarak after his 30-year rule, and you just have to wonder what's going to happen next in the Middle East.
Well, they just moved the largest elephant in the region, so imagine the rest of the Arab states are not as large as Egypt, and I don't think if their people are adamant about change, I think they'll get it, and they'll be successful at it.
You know, it was widely reported that there was a little tiff between Saudi Arabia's leader and President Obama over this. The Saudis believing that the U.S. Should have supported Mubarak stronger and not have gone so much into supporting the side of the people. What do you make of Saudi Arabia, and what might happen there in response to this?
Well, I honestly don't have the full picture on Saudi. I have not watched Saudi. I'm more concentrated on the Egyptian issue. But I think Saudi is very stable. Its financial, its people are very well off, and the Gulf states are the same. They are not suffering from the money is a commodity, it's not a need over there. So I don't think that's going to be an issue. But as far as the ruler, I know they love King Abdullah in Saudi, and maybe there's just a little time of King Abdullah being upset. I'm not really sure.
Now, we're looking at pictures of what appears to be a bonfire. People at home may think, oh my gosh, are the protesters being attacked in some way? But this is still a huge, giant celebration that's going on there in Tahrir Square. What do you think was the tipping point here? You know, after yesterday, with all the disappointment, then a big section of this crowd started making its way to the palace. Do you think that Mubarak and the vice president and perhaps the army just looked at the crowds, the swelling crowds of people who did not go home like the vice president had asked them to do yesterday, but in fact the crowds got larger? Do you believe that at some point they just looked at the situation and they said there's nothing that can be done, we've got to do what the people want?
From the very beginning of all this, the Egyptian people are extremely resilient, and they have fought for this for years, and of course now the world has listened to them. And again, you got a group of people that have suffered for years under dictatorship, but what's more importantly is what you've seen in the last 24 hours. They have been waiting for the eruption of joy, and this is the deal with the Middle East. they, especially the Egyptians, are known for their culture and their social and their love for their music. And that's what you're going to see. You're not going to see any fighting or any demonstrations other than happiness today, tomorrow. This is going to be a joy time for them for days to come.
They certainly are joyful. You can see the expressions on their faces. A change has come to the Middle East with the president of Egypt stepping down. Mr. Henn, thank you so much for joining us. We'll talk to you a little bit later. Christopher Henn, the former Middle East advisor for the Department of Homeland Security. Thank you so much. We certainly appreciate your comments.